Good. So another question that came up, and this seems simple on the surface, but this is perhaps an interesting issue to talk about, is fever, right? I mean, we experience that on a regular basis. So what is it, and why is it there? What does it do? And why do some infectious agents cause it and others don't?
Yeah, great question. I think you can think of fever as exceeding the physiological range, temperature range at which your cells can function, and it's not that much dissimilar to your car. You have a range where, when your thermostat gets into the real hot, you're in trouble, okay? And what has caused that? Well, something isn't cooling the car correctly. So we have similar mechanisms, and again, these are genetically determined. Everybody has a variety, a different range of temperatures in which they function. So when you're cold, what do? Well, if you exercise or metabolize a little bit more, that boosts your temperature. Okay. So fever then is when we exceed, we go over the top end of that physiological set point, and these are determined by neurons in your hypothalamus, a certain part of your brain. So they have little sensors for everything in your brain. All of them have to work correctly. So if something affects those sensors, then they're not working well, and your set points can vary. So one of the ways you can get fever is to damage those cells. Okay? Some of the bacterial infections produce something called a pyrogen, pyra being fire, so it's actually something that specifically targets those neurons. There was a comment.
Well,
yeah.
well, but is it always such that? So there are cases also where the parasite is suffering from the fever, isn't it? Where actually fever is a good adaptation.
Absolutely.
I mean, isn't that the notion? I mean, so the question is, is fever a consequence of an infection, or is it an adaptive response to an infection?
It occurs it doesn't have to be an infection to cause fever, but it certainly can be effective. So, and particularly for viruses, okay, again, within anything that is internal. Okay, so anything that's circulating in the blood, as the temperature of the blood goes up, it's going to change it can change the composition of their lipid membranes, makes things melt a little bit more. And absolutely, I mean, we've done experimental infections where you notice in animals where if animals have a fever, they clear the infection. And if they survive.
Nice examples are in those organisms without backbones, the invertebrates. They're often able to move themselves into an environment and cure the infection that way.
That's right.
There was a really nice case where in 1927 the Nobel Prize for Medicine was given to Julius Wagner-Jauregg, because what he did was he took patients who had syphilis and he gave them malaria. And by giving them malaria, they generated a fever. When they got this fever, they cleared the syphilis. They still had malaria afterwards, but he was unable to get rid of it.
Choose your poison.
But the malaria case is really interesting, I think. So there's no question that malaria causes fever. What is an open question as to whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing from the host health perspective. Yeah. I think one of the areas in medicine which is going to really advance in the next few years is some understanding, hopefully theoretical understanding, of when a particular thing we call a symptom is something you should interfere with because it's bad for the host, and when you should let it run its course. And in the case of malaria, it could be that it's a host response trying to cook out the parasite, and that's some suggestion of that from the animal models. It could be the parasite's inducing it to try and cause dysregulation in the immune response of the host, or it could just be some sort of weird breakdown pathology, not good for anybody. So you think, okay, that's three strong hypotheses, let's do some experiments and see. And you know that with malaria, people get they're dabbed and they fans and mopped down and so forth. You can give them paracetamol, things like that, to bring the temperature down. All of that, when it's been looked at, it's still unclear. So obviously you can't not treat a patient, so the patient's getting drugs. when these experiments are done, and you ask, on top of that, is it good to cool them down or not? And the answer is ambiguous. So over 100 years since we've had good drugs, we still don't know whether it's a good idea to mop your brow, sit under a fan, put ice around when you've got malaria. It's incredible to me, just incredible. In a lot of animals, they don't fever in response to malaria. And so that makes you wonder.
But is it really the temperature? Is it actually, is that at least known?
If you
Or is
put
the temperature a side effect of whatever the immune system is doing?
If you put the parasites in an incubator at a hotter temperature, so you grow them on their own without a person, then the temperature is clearly bad for them. But there are situations in lizard malarias like it where you can put the lizard in an incubator and heat things up and the lizard will die and those parasites are still viable.
Right.
So it's really very ambiguous, even in something as clear and as straightforward as malaria.
And the other thing I find so fascinating about fever is that it's usually, I mean, it can go haywire, right? It can go, it can be the thing that actually ends up killing the host.
Yeah, it's a fine point when you get that close to what's, you know, can the host survive and the parasite survive? And and it varies in different genetic backgrounds.
All right, so this concludes this week's AUA. We hope to see you next week. We got a bunch of really interesting videos coming up. By the time you watch this, they will probably be online. So thanks a lot and thank you guys.